Yo, how's it going? I'm sharing with you a sermon today out of Numbers 28, 16 to 31. The title of the message is Your Offering is a Reminder of Who You Are. It determines if you are a sheep with a shepherd. Why did God ask for offering? What was God's main desire? In Numbers 28, 16 to 31, right before Israel enters into the promised land, Moses asks God for help. He was concerned because he wasn't going to go into the promised land. He was concerned that Israel would be like sheep without a shepherd. Could it be that these offerings were to guide them, to remind them of who they are and whose they are? In the same way, when we obey God, it is for our good and it's for our future. When we give God our offering of obedience, our offering of love, that's when we experience our shepherd. If we do not obey God, if we do not give God our obedience, our offering of obedience and love, then we will be like sheep without a shepherd. Your offering is a reminder of who you are and if you are a sheep with a shepherd. The offerings that God required of Israel were lamb, fine flour, oil, and wine. These things were repeated in what they were giving to God, what God asked for them to offer. Why and what did these offerings mean? What was the significance behind these offerings? Well, first off, let's look at the lamb. Many Israelites, their profession, their job, they were shepherds. Since the time of Egypt, people of Israel were shepherds for many generations. And this was directly connected. Offering a sheep that without blemish, this was very symbolic. The shepherds did their best to take care of their sheep, and maybe it was also a sign of God taking care of his people. Fine flour, oil, and wine. What does this symbolize? This was a big part of Israel's daily bread, Israel's daily meals. Maybe it was a question that God was asking, can you trust me that I will provide your daily bread? Just as much as you work hard, can you trust me that I will provide for you, that I will be, in fact, your shepherd? Why was this symbolic? Just as much as Israel needed their food, needed their daily provision, needed their flock. It was a sign of their wealth, a sign of their future. Just as much as they needed that, they need relationship with God. Jesus reminds Israel later that man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. These offerings were to remind Israel of who they are and of whose they are. In verse 16, we can see that God is talking to Israel about Passover and that they should eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Verse 16 is emphasizing a key ceremony called the Passover, which we find in Exodus 12. What was Exodus 12 about? What was the Passover about? The Passover was a reminder of who God was, God who saves his people from death. This offering that God is asking them to do, Passover offering, was to remind them once again of who God was, of who God is, and of who they are. There are two phrases in the passages from verse 16 to 31 that are continually repeated. The first phrase is, on the first day shall be on the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall not do laborious work. And the second phrase that is repeated is they shall be without defect. These two things are highlighted again and again and again. What is a holy convocation and no laborious work? What is that to remind the people? It's to remind the people of their creator. When God created the heavens and the earth, when he created everything inside, he rested on the seventh day. And for the people of Israel, they were to remind themselves on the day of rest, on the Sabbath, of who God is. They were to stop from their work, they're to stop from their strength, and they're to be in communion with God. This is something that's repeated over and over, again and again. God rested from his work and Sabbath, and it was to remind them who created you. It was to remind them. When they gave this offering to God, they were to remind themselves of who God was, of who God is. You know, the thing is, God doesn't need our offering to survive. God isn't waiting for our money to live. He doesn't need our money. God doesn't need anything from us. What God is wanting is our hearts. What God is wanting, even in this passage, is the heart of Israel. God is shepherding his people through telling them to give him offering. It's through obedience that we are shepherded. He's wanting the hearts of Israel. He's inviting the people to know him and to love him through obedience. The second phrase that we see is they shall be without defect. God's standards of purity is a sign to his people. God is holy, and he's asking us to be holy. The ultimate end of God's people is a holy nation. This offering is to remind them, this unblemished lamb, this no defect, is to remind the people of who they are. You see, there's two types of offerings that is reminded in this passage. There's the Passover offering and there's the Feast of Weeks or Pentecost offerings. These are two very symbolic and famous celebrations for the people of Israel. And even Jesus uses these two celebrations. Passover symbolizes Jesus' death and his resurrection, him passing over death and giving us life. Feast of Weeks is to symbolize the gift of the Holy Spirit. These two things are used even by Jesus. Passover symbolizes Jesus, the gift of Jesus. Pentecost symbolizes the gift of the Holy Spirit. Israel were to do these two things. In between these two main feasts, they were to remind themselves, they were to be in the place of obedience. Here's the thing. The goal and the point of offering is not sacrifice. It's our hearts. The point of offering is to remind ourselves of who we are, of who we belong to. God doesn't need our offering. He wants relationship with his people. The offering is requiring the purpose of offering is for us to be led, for us to be shepherded. And through obedience, through that, we enter into being shepherded. Those who obey, those who offer their heart, their love to the Lord, they receive Jesus. They receive the Holy Spirit, the Passover and the Pentecost. This was to be a sign for the Israelites that as they obey in this, that one day they will receive the promise of one day they will be in the promised land, shepherded well. And you guys want to know this is deeply connected. Jesus comes during the Passover and dies for us so that we can pass over into the Pentecost, receiving relationship with God through the Holy Spirit. This is what God is doing. He is shepherding Israel, and he's shepherding us through obedience. So I just wanted to remind you that your offering is a reminder of who you are. It's a reminder of whose you are. You were created not just to obey, but you were created for a relationship with God. God bless you.